Labate. My name is Daniela Labate Cavelli, and I'm with NIAPRS. I want to take just a minute to welcome everyone to our webinar today, creating a safe space for growth and learning in supervision. Even if you would just advance the slide for me, please. Awesome, thanks. So we're so happy to have our friend Eve Addis with us again today for another supervision topic webinar. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording as well as a copy of the slide deck at our website at www.niaprs.org within a couple of days. We will be sending out a link for an evaluation to every attendee. You're going to use that link if you'd like a CE. We're offering CEs for LMSW, LCSW, CPRP, and LMHCs. So please return that completed evaluation within 48 hours of today's webinar in order to receive your credit. And we also want to encourage you to use the chat box feature. We've set aside some time at the end for questions and answers. So we want to make sure to get those in. So please, type those in as things come up and you have comments and questions during Eve's presentation. I'll be keeping track of those, and then we'll spend some time together at the end addressing those. Next slide, please. Want to remind attendees to register for next month's webinar, the Peer Profession Progression, which will take place on Tuesday, September 14th at noon. We've got a great lineup of some of the state's leaders in the field of peer services, and they're going to be with us to talk about education and training in peer services, as well as how you can support people in their path to recovery as someone with lived experience. So we hope you'll join us for that, and you can register at our website at niaprs.org. Okay, next slide. Now to introduce you to our presenter. Many of you already know Dr. Eve Addis. I'm not going to read the whole slide. You can see for yourself.
No, do not.
I will not. We don't have that.
We don't have time. We don't have time.
Okay.
You'll be able, if you really are interested, you'll be able to kind of get this when you get the slides. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So the Cliff's Notes version is that he's got a ton of experience working with community-based behavioral health and supported housing programs. He is principal at Addis Integrated Health Strategies, his consulting practice, where he really does a wonderful job of integrating best practices and trauma-informed culture into everything that he does. So we're really happy to have him with us today to talk to us about some supervision topics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Daniela, and welcome everyone. So, one of the first things about creating a safe space is to be present and to be fully present. So I'd like you all to really take a minute, not even because you don't have that much time, but take 30 seconds to kind of try to put everything out of your head that is encumbering it, because I'd like you to kind of spend the next hour, get the most out of it, enjoy it fully without having to kind of be a servant to your cell phone or to your email. So if you can just, for the next hour, shut it all down, and be here with us, and let's have a good time. I would like you to participate as much as possible, particularly as we begin, because this is a question that I would like you to answer, and you can answer it in your real voice, which would be preferable. But if not, then in the chat box. But I'd like you to answer this question. Why become a supervisor in human services? Why? So you can unmute yourself. Tell me why. Why would you, or why did you become a supervisor?
So Eve, we're in the webinar platform, so I don't think people can unmute themselves, but they can surely use the chat box.
Okay. Well, somebody raised their hand. So I guess use the chat box to answer the question.
Yeah, that would be better.
Yeah, for whoever, 2 people raised their hands, so I understand that you can't really unmute yourselves in this format.
Oh, actually, I can unmute you. Go ahead. Tommy, I think is your name.
Tony.
Tony, sorry.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So what's your answer, Tony?
My answer is I love to train people, and I love seeing potential in others because there's always growth in everybody. And for people to move up the ladder, that succeed, that's what I enjoy seeing. I enjoy seeing I've trained people who's moved further than I have in level entry positions. And just to see that gives you a joy that you're in the right profession, you're in the right field, and you're doing a great job with training others because like I always say, you can't lead others if you're not willing to be led.
Thank you, Tony. Anybody else? What's coming in the chat box, Daniela?
All right, so we've got provide supportive environment to help inform and provide resources, mentor, to help people do the best work that they can, whether it be through resources or mentorship, support career path leadership, help guide the clinical staff and impact policy procedure improvement, all of the above.
Okay, so it sounds like most of you are really interested in workforce development. You're interested in bringing your workforce, as you said, to the next level, and helping your workforce reach their potential. So this is a very noble reason to become a supervisor. You know, some people would say they did it because they were tired of, taking or being just a supervisee. They wanted some power and control. Some people could say that they were doing it because it involves a higher salary. So, but I think that, you know, the reasons you've given are really very noble ones and really the subject of today's presentation. So when you are a supervisor, what are some expectations that you have of your supervisees? So this is another question. So what do you expect from your supervisees when you, as a supervisor, what do you expect from them? Okay, raise your hand. Tony, go ahead. And Susan.
What do I expect? I expect the person willing to learn. I expect you can learn from each other because as a supervisor, you have to look at the individual that you're supervising, including yourself. I expect people to put their best foot forward. Be able to take corrective criticism, because there's going to be a time when you have to be able to accept that, work on that, and then that betters you to be a better supervisor.
Okay, Tony, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, Susan. Susan, unmute yourself.
Yeah, you should be able to speak, Susan. I'm just going to go through what's in the chat box real quick. Lots of answers of honesty, hard work and effort, asking questions, honest communication, guidance, flexibility, curiosity, authenticity, open-mindedness, teachable, more communication, integrity.
Well, that's a lot of expectations that you want people to be able to be when you're supervising them. And I think those are all, let's hear from Susan. Susan, what did you have?
I had integrity and trust, responsible and respectful, and hopefully to meet timeframes.
Okay, well, of course, here we now have kind of a combination of, functional, they have to be responsible for keeping timeframes. But then you mentioned integrity, which is certainly something that is a quality that you want somebody to have, and certainly an expectation, I would think, of all supervisors. So I would say that the expectations of supervisees are very high, because you're also expecting them to be at the forefront of the work, as they say, in the trenches, on the ground, dealing with a lot of issues that are sometimes painful, that are sometimes difficult, that are sometimes scary. And so you're in addition to all these other things like meeting timeframes and having integrity, you're also expecting them to be able to manage in environments and in situations that would be I would consider difficult. I mean, you know, health services and being in the behavioral health field poses a lot of demands on supervisees. And one of the things that you expect is for them to be able to manage all of that. So let's keep that in mind, because how do we sort of create that safe space so that people can do and be all that you expect them to be, so that you can then help them, as you said earlier, move up in their careers, move up to the next level. So if there was a Supervision 101, you know, one of the things that I find very interesting is that in graduate school or even in undergraduate, nobody teaches you how to be a supervisor. I always say it's the one thing that's sort of trial by fire. You become a supervisor and you're either going to rely on your own experience as a supervisee, taking what you think is good from your supervisory experience, or you're just going to sort of wing it and then maybe kind of learn from colleagues or whatever. But if there were a Supervision 101 course, they would teach you how to provide guidance and support, how to share your expertise, how to help your supervisees problem solve. One of the things, of course, that's a demand of the supervisor is to train, and many of you mentioned training, but training your staff in policy implementation. You have to sample documentation, right? In terms of its, like you said, timeliness, it should be timely, but it also should have a certain level of quality. Are you going to monitor productivity? There's also time and attendance that becomes a sort of an issue for some people. And there are those job responsibilities. You want to make sure that people do what their job entails. And so you're going to be doing some task management to make sure that people are able to sort of integrate all those demands around their jobs and their job responsibilities. Then, unfortunately, when things go south, you have to do disciplinary activity. And then there's that, you know, final and uncomfortable and difficult moment when you have to sometimes, hopefully never, but inevitably have to terminate someone. Now, if we look at this from a different lens, what does your organization expect from you? So we talk about, you know, why you became a supervisor. That's good. We talked about what you expect from your supervisees, but what does your organization expect from you as a supervisor? Okay, I think we have Susan. Is your hand still up? Unmute yourself. I see your hand. I see the hand icon. Daniela, anything in the chat box?
I am just unmuting Susan.
Your sound is kind of low, Daniela.
I'm just unmuting Susan.
Okay.
Go ahead, Susan, you should be able to speak now.
Susan? All right. I don't know what happened to Susan, but Daniela, can you make your sound louder?
I can.
Okay. So anything in the chat box of what does your organization expect?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat right now. Oh,
Wow.
Here we go. Got something here. To support staff and also act as a mediary between upper management and direct service staff, hard work supporting staff in growth, training, quality control, crisis management. to make sure that make sure I've got some outcomes for the program: respectful communication, compassionate, solution focused, to be the example of the expectation of the agency mission and value.
Oh, boy. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And-
Thank you for those. I think those are all, you're right on. You're all right on in terms of, so the organization expects you to do something which has to do with the organization's own interests, right? Quality control, promote the mission and values of the organization. And so, these are the typical responsibilities that you find in your job descriptions. Develop staff competencies, maintain the standard of care, proper and consistent implementation of policies and procedure, regulatory oversight, and again, promoting the organizational culture, which are all totally legit of the organization to expect from you to do. And that's what you'll typically find. However, you will not find usually these. And I don't know if any of you mentioned, I know some of it was kind of nuanced in your responses, you kind of alluded to it, but the ideal organizational purpose, and this is what organizations really should be asking supervisors to do, to promote positive staff morale, to provide support and motivation to optimize workforce performance, to encourage and elicit ideas, creativity, and innovation from the workforce. Look, we know that the people who are on the ground generally have and generally do have ideas that can maybe make the work easier, that can make the work more effective because they're doing it. And do we make a space? Do we create an environment where people feel sort of enabled or people feel encouraged or that their ideas are actually welcomed? Talent. We are having a major issue right now in our workforce, and people maintain, COVID has sort of thrown us into a workforce tailspin, and it's very hard to find people in general, and it's very hard to find and retain. If we find talent, how do we retain it? It's so hard to find it. Some of you mentioned mentoring, that's part of it, but talent is something that we can't take for granted. And then you want to, as an organization, have supervisors that whatever they do, that their work results in optimal health outcomes of persons served. Because we are all in the health business. So yes, there are lots of things we're asked to do, but if you put it all so that there's one sort of package outcome at the end, is that whatever we do and whatever our workforce does, that it results in optimal health outcomes of persons served. So this is sort of first and foremost. And then last but not least is attend to workforce wellness. And this is something that's usually completely absent in the job descriptions of supervisors. Workforce wellness is I think, the most important thing, because if you have a workforce that's not well, if you have a workforce that can't sort of be well because the circumstances of their work or their environment is not one that promotes wellness, then you're going to have a very, very unwell organization. And the capacity of the organization to have results that optimize health outcomes of persons served will be greatly limited. So as we're talking about creating a safe space, we want to create a space where people feel valued, where people feel nurtured, and not that a lot of the things you mentioned don't include that, but we want an environment and we want to create relationships that reinforce and that promote wellness. So this is where, the sort of what is the expression? The pedal hits the metal, or something like that, where this is where we really are talking about supervision that is able to do all of these things. So whenever we have objectives, we have to kind of balance them with what are the barriers. So, there are barriers and you all know them. The salaries aren't competitive. Talent is hard to find at the current salaries. We are competing with other healthcare environments. The work is demanding. The work has risks that people may not want to take. And then there are those occupational hazards. And all of us who work in this field know this. We know that when we go into the human services field, when we go into the behavioral health sector of work, we are exposing ourselves continuously to the pain and suffering of others. We encounter potential triggers of our own pain and suffering. There is very often in our interest and our motivation to help others a personalization and blurring of boundaries, which can have serious consequences for everyone. And then there is that sort of thing that could happen if it's not mitigated, and that is compassion fatigue. And we're going to define these in just a second. But I wanted to get you to kind of sort of see that while we are talking about objectives of, supervision and the organizational objectives, we're talking about also what the work involves and what the work entails, and that we have in our sector a very high rate of burnout. I'm going to read you some statistics around now and COVID, that COVID has really put a bright spotlight on this issue of compassion fatigue and burnout. From June to September 2020, Mental Health America hosted a survey. They surveyed 1,119 healthcare workers, and they found that 93% of healthcare workers were experiencing stress. 76% reported exhaustion and burnout. In the previous 3 months to the survey, they found that 82% had trouble with sleep. 70% reported physical exhaustion, and 63% responded as having work-related dread. 56% reported headaches and stomach aches, and 39% said they did not feel like they had adequate emotional support. So I want to say that, yes, COVID added to these occupational hazards, certainly, but even without it, and certainly now because of COVID, a lot of people are walking away from working in healthcare, particularly when it has demonstrated so much risk for themselves and their families. So I think that in this environment, creating a safe space becomes even more important. It becomes even more critical because not only are we dealing with the occupational hazards that would normally exist for workers in behavioral health, but we're also talking about an environment right now which is laden with all sorts of other occupational risks. So we have to ask ourselves, how as organizations do we endeavor to meet the expectations of the people we supervise in our behavioral health settings? How do we keep our workforce motivated, interested, fulfilled in their work, and safe? And how do we prevent compassion fatigue and ultimately burnout? Because compassion fatigue and burnout are not only a detriment to the workforce, but they also represent an associated loss of productivity for the organization, much more of a risk of negligence as people are no longer focused on their work, and then those costs that are preventable, but they are costs of a turnover because recruitment and onboarding costs a lot of money. So we have a lot of imperatives here to keep our workforce interested, motivated, and fulfilled in their work. So, when we are talking about creating a safe space, it addresses many issues for the supervisor, for the individual being supervised, and then for the organization and its own well-being and sustainability. So let me define compassion fatigue for a minute, and we're going to go through the difference between compassion fatigue, burnout, and something called secondary traumatic stress, because they are slightly different. So compassion fatigue is a natural consequence of working with people who are trying to be empathic and authentic in the way they work. It is what may result from working with individuals who have been challenged with mental illness, addiction, and trauma. So this is the continuous exposure to the pain, suffering of others. You know, that takes its toll. And let's please remember that as we try to do our job as supervisors, that we never lose sight of that, because it interferes with positive job performance and optimal health outcomes. If we have compassion fatigue, and I'm going to, in a slide or two, go over what that looks like. We're going to have a sort of a barrier to achieve optimal health outcomes for persons served. And if not acknowledged and prevented, compassion fatigue can have serious health consequences and burnout for supervisees, because there is something that happens to the individual. And I think when I showed you those statistics around COVID, that it does result in physical complications. You know, the reporting of headaches and the reporting of stomach aches and the reporting of other kinds of serious health issues, lack of sleep, and all of that. These have consequences on the body of the supervisees, in addition to all the performance issues that are going to result from compassion fatigue. So these are the symptoms of compassion fatigue, and as a supervisor, this is the way you could pick it up in your supervisees: irritability, apathy, loss of motivation, fatigue, feeling overwhelmed, loss of interest in things one enjoys, and intrusive thoughts about persons served. And this is sort of the blurring of boundaries issues that comes from, you want your supervisees to be their most empathic. You want them to be their most authentic in working with the people they serve. And this is especially true with the peer kind of work, because peers really use their own experience and disclose their own experience in their work. And so the blurring of boundaries for peers is even greater. The potential for that is even greater. Now, burnout, again, this is sort of a little bit of a statistic here. In a recent Gallup poll, 23% of full-time employees felt burned out at work very often or always, and another 44% felt burned out sometimes. This is in the general workforce. So this isn't even in working in environments like the ones our supervisees work in, which are laden with those occupational hazards. And the 5 signs of burnout, again, this is sort of one step beyond compassion fatigue, is anxiety, general fatigue and lack of sleep, lack of creativity and purpose, emotional numbness, which is sort of like depression. And here is the sort of the crux here, a loss of hope and optimism. And this is when sort of the burnout happens, when the person has completely, as I say, disengaged or checked out of the work that they're there to do. They can go through the motions, but their heart is no longer in it. Their kind of energy is no longer there. And so that gets picked up immediately by the people they're working with, and that conveys sort of this sort of hopelessness. And so rather than sort of moving people that you're working with in a direction that helps them to achieve and helps them to grow, the message that a person who is burned out is giving is, it doesn't really matter. And that can have very serious consequences for the person who is seeking the opportunity to heal and instead is getting this helplessness as the message. So there is another sort of problem here, and this is more with people who have experienced trauma, And this is known as vicarious trauma of the helper. This is what's known as helping that hurts. This is where a person, again, somebody who has, and again, for peers who are in this field, peers who have had their own struggles, peers who have had their own distress, working with other people in their work who are going through distress, going through trauma in real time. And this can have what's called a secondary traumatic stress reaction and trigger very often the trauma of the supervisee. So, you know, when this happens, the body then responds in ways in secondary traumatic stress that can affect the person's capacity to remember things, to learn. It's sort of like the memory and the learning capacity of the individual almost shuts down. As one's perceptions of oneself is undermined, and one's sense of safety, trust, and independence is also undermined. The supervisees in a state of that kind of distress and arousal, their capacity for processing information and learning is highly diminished. So, you know, this is then becomes a real barrier for the supervisor, because when this sets in, it's very hard to reach the person. The person is already in a state of traumatic stress. And so as a supervisor, your effectiveness in helping depends on your knowing your supervisee's level of distress and arousal. So this is a tall order, but I think that one of the ways to deal with this is to have that conversation with your supervisees at the outset and kind of give them a heads up that this could potentially happen. And you want to create an environment, or again, you want to create that safety or that safe space where the supervisees feels safe enough to be able to engage in a conversation with you as the supervisor about these things that may be happening to them as a result of the work that they're doing. So supervision is key for preventing secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And it's also key for delivering organizational performance that promotes the best health outcomes for persons served. So your jobs as supervisors are really, I can't say this enough, are critical. Somebody said that, you know, you are the conveyor of the organizational mission and values. You are also, independent of being a conveyor, you are also critical in the organization's success, because you are in charge of the workforce that delivers the services. And if you are not able, or if you are not in a position to create that safe space to address secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout, it will be impossible for the organization to have a workforce whose performance results in the optimal health outcomes for the people that the organization serves. So, you know, your supervision is key for the organization's success. So how do we create a safe space for growth and learning in supervision? And so we are looking here at applying the principles of trauma responsive care in supervision. And these are ensuring physical and emotional safety and maintaining boundaries. So, and we're going to go into more detail about this, but these 5 principles, beginning with safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, and this is about maximizing trust in the supervisory relationship, that relationship should be consistent and predictable, that tasks are made clear, that boundaries are maintained, that there is respect, and that there is an absence of judgment. We want to create an environment where, and somebody mentioned this earlier, where the staff feel safe enough with each other, where the supervisees can look to each other for peer support, that the organization, rather than promoting competitiveness and rewarding people unevenly or getting into a reward system that creates inequity, to have a system of support and mutual support, that the organization promotes mutual support of its workforce so that the workforce can serve to itself to become a bulwark against stress and burnout. We want the supervisees in this instance to feel empowered, to feel that their voice matters, to give them choices and help them figure out solutions, to become a partner, that a supervisor is not only someone who uses their power to move things along, but also that a supervisor is a partner in getting the best performance out of the supervisor, out of the supervisee, so that the supervisee can have the most positive impact on the people they're working with. This is a power sharing dimension of supervision where decision-making is shared and where strengths building and managing challenges is also something that is shared. I'm going to talk later about how this works. We want the supervisor and the supervisee to collaborate. And this is, again, that sharing of power, the collaboration. And then finally, but not least, is dealing with the issues of cultural, historical, gender, and racial inequity. We are in the midst of a big revolution in this country, hopefully one that will continue to flourish as we all become more aware of our racial history and of the racial inequity that exists in this country and in the workplace. And somebody recently I heard, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but I put it in here. They talked about a brave space. So while this presentation about a safe space is about a safe space, a brave space is a space in the organization where people could talk openly about these things and where there's no shaming and there's no blaming, but there's learning, where people are able to learn. They're able to show that they don't know a lot of things and other people can sort of help them learn. And so we want to, in addition to safe space, we want to create a brave space where people can learn, can speak up, can make mistakes, but that they won't be shamed or blamed, that rather they will be supported and learn how to avoid those kinds of, I guess, those microaggressions, as we all have learned to call them, how we can sort of learn without being afraid to express ourselves. So I just wanted to say that a dimension of a safe space is also creating a brave space, particularly around cultural, historical, racial, and gender issues. So to create safety, first of all, and I'm going to kind of go back to my first comment here, is everybody in that room, everybody who is the supervisor and the supervisee, or even in group supervision, that everyone there is present, fully present. And how we do that is really by creating an expectation that when we walk into that room for supervision, both the supervisor and supervisee are committed to that moment, that the supervision should begin on time and it should end on time. It's not something that sort of happens when the supervisor feels like it. I unfortunately had too many experiences like that as a supervisee, where I had supervisors who they called me into their office when they felt like it to do supervision, rather than my being able to know that there was a time, that the time would begin at a certain time, always, that it was predictable, that I knew what to expect. That to me is safety. It's safety when I know what to expect, when I know that it's going to begin on time, it's going to end on time, and the person in the room is going to be present fully, not on the phone, not taking emails, and not sort of thinking about something else. And that's sort of the respect part of it. But similarly, that I make a commitment that I'm going to walk into that room as a supervisee and that I'm going to be fully present. The space I'm in should be comfortable and free of distraction. The expectations should be set up at the beginning, at the forefront. What do you expect from me? How are we going to conduct this supervisory experience together? The supervisor should be very clear about what the limits of confidentiality are. You know, I want you to be open with me as a supervisee, but there are limits where if you tell me certain things, that I'm going to have to report those. So this is something that is particularly in regard to any disclosure that the supervisee may make to the supervisor around something that may be harmful to the person served. That's just one example. But again, this should be laid out at the outset, just to be clear and to make things predictable. And that the format and the content of the supervisory relationship and supervisory experience are arrived at collaboratively. So always ask, does this work for you? This is the way sort of I'm thinking of doing this. You know, should we have an agenda or not? Who should make up the agenda? How often or how early before the supervision should we be able to add items to the agenda? So this is to sort of structure it in a way that both the supervisor and the supervisee are comfortable. In the supervisory relationship, we want self-disclosure because that's where the individual will share their distress, will share those signs of compassion fatigue or the onset of burnout. And we want that so that we can help to mitigate it and make a difference. So we want the disclosure, but at the same time, again, we want the person not to feel restricted, but at the same time, we have to kind of be careful not to become the therapist and to keep the thing that we're doing focused on performance. We want the supervisee to be encouraged to be creative and innovative in solving problems. We want them to come up with their own solution. The supervisor should be emotionally present, listening carefully and not judging. And then again, the supervisor routinely asking, is this working for you? Always in the interest of the person and making sure that the person is able to get the most out of that dialogue, out of that conversation. The supervisor's approach is always strengths-based. So you're always looking at building on the person's strengths. Again, responding to distress and to be available for the individual, for the supervisee in times of crisis. And the supervisor is intentionally focused on building emotional agility. What I mean by that is building the person's own ability to manage the stress of the workday, to manage those occupational hazards. So the job of the supervisor is not necessarily to come up with the answers, but it's to help the person, based on the person's own strengths, figure out how they can best manage the demands of the job. The supervisor also supports and encourages the supervisee's wellness. And we're going to get into more detail on that a little bit later. And then the supervisor should have wellness information and resources to be able to guide the individual should that person need more than the supervision in order to be able to be at their best and in order to manage their stress. So each supervisor, hopefully with the help of the organization, should have sort of a list of resources that they can refer the individual to. Because again, this may, some organizations have programs that have to do with, employees being able to get treatment or being able to get assistance, employee assistance programs. Some don't, but there are resources. Every community has resources, and supervisees should have those at their fingertips in order to guide the person they're supervising should that person need something outside of the supervisory relationship to manage their own wellness. And here, all of this points to trust as the key in the supervisory relationship. It's to create a relationship where the person trusts the supervisor enough to be able to disclose things, to be able to feel respected, and to be able to feel that their sort of strengths are being valued and they are building on their own strengths in order to manage the demands of their job. So when a supervisee discloses, we want to acknowledge and support the person's feelings. We don't want to necessarily give directions and advice. We don't want to assume that we know what's best. We want to elicit what the supervisee thinks is best. We want to encourage the supervisee to identify their strengths, their needs, and their resources. And we want to, again, offer them the connection to external resources that might be helpful. Now, there are ways to respond when a supervisee begins to sort of disclose their distress. When they begin to talk in a trustworthy, safe space, when they start to discuss the issues that they're having in being able to do their jobs. And you, as a supervisor, can say things like, how did you or are you coping with that? Have you shared this with anyone? What have you done or what are you doing to get by? What have you done or are you doing to manage your stress? Who do you talk to when you feel worried or stressed like this? Has this been affecting you? What can I do to make sure you are getting what you need? What can I do to support you in taking care of yourself? So these are all responses that, again, create and are the substance of that supervisory relationship. And finally, I appreciate, and finally here is a matter of speaking because there are many ways to respond. These are just some examples, but one that kind of supports the individual and respects the individual is, I appreciate all the hard work and dedication that you are putting into your work, and I'm sure the client or the family does as well. Are you taking time for yourself to recharge? When was the last time you took some time off? Do you have any vacations planned? These are sort of the self sort of wellness, the way the person can sort of begin to kind of take charge of their own wellness, and that the supervisor can help them to kind of move in that direction to see that, you know, they need to do things for themselves, that at the end of the day, supervision should help guide a person for the long run to identify their own stress and then to know what it is that they can do to help manage that stress. Be mindful as you do this work and in creating this safe space with your supervisees, that the work you are asking them to do is fraught with stressors, that the people you supervise are highly susceptible to compassion fatigue and burnout. Be mindful that you're providing supervision that is strengths-based and person-centered. Does that sound familiar? Be mindful of your own adherence to the safe space that you have created, that you are consistent, that you are helping to create a safe frame for the supervision. That, as I said, it's scheduled consistently so that the person knows on Tuesdays at 3:15, I'm meeting with my supervisor. That's when I can then begin to kind of focus on what I can get most out of my supervision. It's going to begin at 3:15 and it's going to end at 4:15. I can then not have to worry about planning my day. I know, and my supervisor is very, very conscientious about starting on time and ending on time. Is very conscientious about my safety in that supervisory session, that I'm going to be respected, that I'm going to be valued, that my strengths are going to be valued, and that my wellness is going to be cared about, that I have a supervisor who cares about my being well. Now, I mentioned the expression emotional agility, and another word for that is resilience. However, I think emotional agility is really, to me, the ability, it really speaks to one's ability to manage one's emotional states. So, you know, you can feel compassion and empathy, but then you have your own ability to kind of work that in a way that it doesn't begin to impose itself on your own emotional life to the detriment of your emotional life. Now, basically, we all have a certain amount of emotional agility, and it's based on our temperament, our personality, our competence, our perseverance, our intelligence, our orientation of the future, our self-efficacy, and our self-esteem. Now, these are all things that differ from individual to individual. However, there are some people that are going to be very strong in some of these areas. So people who, for example, are very intelligent, but may not have that much self-esteem. Or people who have a very nice temperament, but for example, don't have a good sense or a good handle on their hope about the future. So when you are providing supervision, you want to kind of get a sense of each supervisee and acknowledge that they're all going to be different. But this is where the person's emotional agility lies. However, you can build their emotional agility, or you can build their resilience by conducting supervision that's strengths-based and person-centered. And this is what we're talking about here. So you kind of, in your own mind, will be able to tell, hey, this is somebody who, you know, has this strength, but they need me as a supervisor to help them build in this area which is not that strong. So here is where the supervisor assists the supervisee in identifying their emotional triggers. And so this comes out of the supervisees being able or comfortable enough or safe enough to disclose, and the supervisor being able to say, okay, I see that, you know, when this thing happens, this really affects you in a way that you know may interfere with your ability to really work effectively with this person. The supervisor recognizes the supervisee's strength and uses that as the basis for guiding and arriving at solutions to work-related problems. The supervisor supports the supervisee's development of strategies for managing work-related stress. So this is where you are, as a supervisor, helping to build the agility, the emotional agility of the supervisors, of the supervisees you're working with. None of this, however, can happen unless you've created that safe space for that to happen, that supervisory relationship that is built on trust and predictability, and the safety that you provide the individual because you are, I guess, honest, that you are non-judgmental, and that you are interested, fully interested in the person's wellness. And that in addition to all these things that you're going to do, you're also going to attend to the self-care strategies that the individual can participate in order to better handle the demands of their job. So to build emotional agility, first you have to be able to observe the person in their day-to-day work, so that when you are then in that supervisory session, you can refer to real events or real situations. It makes the thing seem it's not based on your impression, but it's based on your actual observation. And then you want to learn and understand what the supervisees personally value. What are they challenged by, and what are they rewarded by? And help them find meaning in the work. And that helps them to kind of be motivated and be interested and consistently eager to be better and learn. You want to create an environment in supervision, in that safe space, where the person is open to learning, because you are respecting their strengths, and you are respecting their own solutions to the problems that they are encountering, or to the barriers that they are encountering. You want to have a safe space where people can honestly share feelings and reactions to challenging situations, and again, helping them to come up with their own strategies for coping with those situations. And always, always in the course of providing supervision, encourage your supervisees to develop self-care plans and check in. How's this going for you? How is this supervision working? Is it helping you? Is it supporting you? Is it helping you find solutions? This check-in is an important part of that supervisory safe space that you're creating. So to cultivate emotional agility in a nutshell, is adopt a strengths-based approach to supervision, cultivate a trustworthy and reliable supervisory relationship, promote a trustworthy peer network for mutual support within the workforce so that supervisees can turn to each other for support, incorporate collaboration and empowerment in your work as a supervisor, demonstrate a belief in learning, that we're all learning. And some of you mentioned that earlier about that it's not only the supervisee who learns, but it's also the supervisor. And always inspire hope. This is the most critical of elements in the work that we're doing. When we've lost hope in the healing power of the individual, then we really need to get out of the profession. And so your job is to, again, to combat compassion fatigue, is to continually inspire hope in your supervisees.
So Eve, I know you're getting towards the tail end of your slide deck, but we only have a couple minutes left and folks are starting to log off. So if you want to just sort of bring us home, that would be awesome.
Okay, so you want to teach your supervisees to identify and address their emotional and cognitive depletion. You want to strengthen them by creating a supervisory space that builds on emotional agility, and you want to provide guidance and support regarding self-care. So these are the kinds of things, and you'll have access to these slides, but these are the kinds of things you can help your supervisees do. They're very, very sort of concrete, but they are self-care sort of tips. And so you can use these. And of course, these will be more effective when the workplace culture, in other words, the resources and policies of the organization also support self-care, and that these are well promoted in the workplace with self-care initiatives. So you can do it on your own, but it's much more effective when your organization is also looking at their environment through that lens. So creating a safe space in supervision increases safety for all, enhances the quality of service delivery, and increases success and satisfaction at work. So here are some resources in terms of having done this over and over. I want you to know that there's been research in this area, and that each of these resources, each of these references supports some of the things that we've been saying are the outcomes of creating a safe space in supervision. Here are the references for the entire presentation. I especially ask you to read, if you want to take a deeper dive, the last one, which is how to lead your team, how to lead when your team is exhausted and you are too. It's a wonderful little article that you can get online. I also recommend taking action against clinician burnout. There is a URL for that. You can also get that online if you wanted. This is a book, but you can take a deeper dive into this whole subject. I'm sorry that we did not have time for Q&A, but you will have access to these slides. And I will ask Daniela to put my email address in the chat box. If you can, Daniela, do that. And if people want to reach me individually and ask a question, I'd be happy to respond. Just identify yourself as having participated in this webinar. Again, thank you for joining today. Thank you for your participation. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, and I look forward to being in the same space with you, in the same safe space with you in the future. Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Eve. Just putting in your information into the chat box so that people have it. And I guess this means that we'll have to have you back because we've had some really good feedback in the chat box. So we'll have you back for some more on supervision sometime soon. And we'll do that one for an hour and 15 minutes next time.
Okay.
Take care.
Of
Take
part
care,
two.
everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.